Welcome back to the Fantasy Rugby Draft Podcast, Aviva Premiership Edition. Thanks for downloading and listening. My name's Bruce Wilkinson, and following on from the theme of the pre-season, we've decided to pick the brains of the Northern Hemisphere's finest. Joining me in the booth is Ollie Silverton from the Rugby Pod. How are you, sir?
I'm very good, thank you, Bruce. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Excellent. How's your off-season been, running sand dunes?
Yeah, exactly. You can imagine doing that. Just come back from Rio yesterday, actually. So there's no better place in the world for some sand dune action there, just to find out how they're getting along with rugby after the inception of the Sevens again. It was a big success overall, so good to see rugby will be a permanent fixture, I think, in the Olympics for a long time.
Absolutely, and as a New Zealander, let's move on.
Yeah.
No, look, it was great to see. You can see seeing Japan beat the Sevens team is just, it just spreads the game and just raises the profile. It is good. I think it's wonderful. You can see the looks on everyone's faces as well when they're watching. It's great. It's great.
Yeah. And the parties in Fiji with the national holiday, I mean, it doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, that's right. No, look, you really feel for them. You're hoping that they're probably everyone's B team, right? If your own team couldn't win, then you wanted Fiji to win.
Absolutely, but I guess sadly it was against my home team, so. But
what a final that was. Anyway, it's Thursday, the 25th of August. It's crunch time in Fantasy Rugby Draft. This is the what we call Draftageddeon this weekend, which is where most of the drafts come off the board the week before the start of the season. In the last podcast, we discussed quite a few specific fly half and outside back situations. They were quite murky, and Alex Shaw and Alan Dimmock did a great job of clearing a lot of those up. So if you haven't checked that pod out, then please do. And it's a must listen for those who are drafting this weekend. In this podcast, I think we're going to look at some players that are rising in average draft position, or ADP, and those that are falling as well. Before that, though, the site's open, fantasyrugbydraft.com. You can join a public league if you like, or if you've got a bunch of your mates, get together, create a league, get that date in the calendar, and go down to the rugby club, go down to the bar. A lot of folks hire out rooms in restaurants as well. We've done that a number of times. I'll get on Skype as well. But most importantly, get that draft date. September 2 is fast approaching. It's only 8 days now. It's crazy. Anyway, and we noticed that when we listened back to the pre-season podcasts, we've been pretty good at analysing players and value and some sleepers and some players to avoid as well. But what I haven't done a very good job of is kind of introducing the product a little bit more to folks. So what I'm going to try to do as we go through this podcast is give a few tips around how your draft day should go and certain strategies that you've got in the draft as well. And one of the first ones, I guess, is looking at what they call ADP, or average draft position. So what average draft position is it pulls out a list of players and where their average draft is. So of all the drafts that have happened so far and all the leagues that have drafted, it's pretty early. We like to kind of say you want to do it as close to the start of the season as possible, to get a little bit of a better handle on some of the pre-season activity, but also to avoid any injuries that might happen. But out of all of those leagues that have drafted, where is, say, Freddie Burns? What is his average position that he's been drafted in? And it gives a really good insight when you look at what it was at the start of the competition versus what it is now after the drafts. So whether he's rising up the boards or whether he's rising down. And a lot of these can be explained away for various reasons, and some of them are quite interesting, and there's some really interesting notes and really interesting kind of patterns that we've seen coming out of the average draft position analysis. So I'm going to dump right into it. So the first one, or the biggest riser in ADP, is Jonathan Joseph. Now, he's jumped 27 spots from 175 up to 147. I'm going to come to you, Ollie. First of all, Jonathan Joseph, what do you expect from him this season? Goodbye?
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, really. I saw he was down 175, and I think that's a bargain, to be honest. I understand, obviously, later in the season, they've obviously got November internationals and then Six Nations, and no doubt he will be involved in both of those for England. But I expect him to have another big year, and you've got to look at where points are scored, and he is absolutely brilliant at gaining 10 metres, scoring tries, try assists, clean breaks, everything. He really ticks the box.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fascinating to see that. And he's obviously has lost his partner in crime in Carl Eastman and Ollie Devoto in the 12 channel. So that could be why a few people are being put off him. But to be honest, I think you could do a lot worse than Jonathan Joseph if, you're later on in the rounds and you're stuck for a bit of a centre option. I think he ticks most of the boxes to get you a fair few points.
So did he have a problem last year at Bath? Was he injured at all? Was he a bit stop-starty?
Yeah, he had a few injuries, but they were nothing. Never was too serious, just a few niggles. But I think, to be honest, it was the second season hangover they speak of. The year before he was scoring for fun. I think 10 tries or so with a hat trick involved. And last year he just didn't quite replicate that form. I remember it took until the Six Nations against Italy. He got a lucky intercept and went on to get a hat trick that game, and that sort of reignited his season again. But on the whole, he couldn't do much in a Bath team that was going backwards regularly. I mean, George Ford had a bad season. There's obviously all the drama with Mike Ford. So I think this is the case of just coming off the back of a bad season or an average season more than anything else. And I look at that ADP, and next to him is sort of Jamie Roberts, and I would every day of the week take Jonathan Joseph over Jamie Roberts. I mean, it's a no-brainer.
Absolutely agree, and I'll get onto him for a second, but the reason I ask about Jonathan Joseph and whether he was injured or not is because his average points per 80 minutes was really poor. It was only 5.6, and if you compare that to, and it's unfair to compare it to Tuilagi, who's up around the 16-17 mark. Yeah. So I was wondering if there was something hindering him, because that was why the ranking was 175, coupled with the fact that he's going to be away on international duty. But we've spoken to folks previously in this pod, and those that have listened would have heard that they're fairly bullish on Jonathan Joseph as well. So it looks like the drafters are listening, and I think that's probably fair enough too, if people are expecting a bit more out of Jonathan Joseph. And I guess he's going to be a fulcrum of that backline, right?
Absolutely. They pretty much build it around him and his relationship with George Ford, obviously. And he has had these calf problems, etc. But it's just a poor year, really. But it will be interesting to see. Manu Tuilagi obviously only got a handful of games last year, but when he did, he absolutely shone. And that Leicester backline now is absolutely terrifying. It's fantastic. Big signings in there. So that's, again, will be very interesting to see how he goes this year, if fit.
It's the perfect storm, though, for Leicester as well, right? It's some big signings, some attacking rugby players that have been signed as well, but it's also the coach has got a bit of flair for the attack, and he knows how to set up systems to be able to make breaks. So it's going to be a really interesting. And you make a good point about Manu Tuilagi. He is one of those players that does go away. He doesn't play a lot of minutes, but when he does, he's a step above, and he's a little bit like. For those that play NFL fantasy, is a little bit like Rob Gronkowski at tight end. So in that he is that step above everybody else, in that he starts to be in the same conversation as some of your top running backs and top wide receivers when you talk about draft day. And he's that person as well. He should be up quite high, but you do have to handcuff him, and you're going to have that backup for when he is away. Either jumping off a Manly ferry, an Auckland ferry, or whether he's going to be an international duty. But you mentioned Jamie Roberts, so that's an interesting one for me. I think I know the reason why, but he was ranked 179, but he's come up 20 places to be 158. Now, I guess we're not talking about great margins here, and we're not talking about any sort of major impact, and I guess people are just picking at the end of the draft. But what do you make of Jamie Roberts actually increasing in value?
Yeah, surprised, to be honest, is one way to put it. Again, you've got to look at transfers and player movement, and there's no one really filling in that centre spot for him. So there's no reason, and no one leaving as well. So there's no reason in that regard, like player movement. And it obviously will be involved in both November and the Six Nations. But he's a lovely, lovely man, Jamie Roberts. But he's very one-dimensional, and he isn't what I'd call the classic fantasy rugby player.
Sure.
I know he's going to make probably, 9 sort of in that 20 tackle region, which does get you points.
Sure.
But he's not a try scorer. He isn't much of a try assists player. He gains a few meters here and there, but doesn't beat defenders. And again, I'm just looking at the point scoring system, and that's what you're looking for. And he doesn't do that particularly. He's brilliant at what he does and that job, but I think it's what all pundits call the ugly side of the game, or the side that's sort of spoken about as much, and that doesn't get you points, sadly. So surprised to see him moving. And as I say, I'd rather, for the most part of the whole Premiership, I think I'd rather be looking at playing 2 13s than a 12 and 13 because they're so much more likely to have that creative edge when the ball's a little bit out a bit wider. And that the same goes with Manu Tuolangi and plenty of others out there. I mean, JP Peterson could well be in that 13 channel as well, new signing. So, yeah, I think that's where my attention would be focused more in the centre category, that's for sure.
Yeah, so Jamie Roberts, I suspect this is a name. We've talked about this before in that people, they're getting down to those 17th, 16, 17 kind of round, 15, 16, 17. They're kind of just swinging for the fences now. There's a lot of names in front of them they don't recognise all of a sudden, and they're like, well, who do I know? I know Jamie Roberts. I'll draft him now on my team. He's got to be good. Now, I've got a question, though. So how is the relationship between the Premiership club managers and the Lions? So I expect him to be not far away from the Lions and perhaps even starting for the Lions. I'm not too sure what it's going to look to down the line, but is there going to be a tap on the shoulder that, we talk about Steve Hansen's done that a few times in Super Rugby players and he kind of feeds down a little bit. Is there going to be a tap on the shoulder to say, can we just manage Jamie Roberts' minutes this season, please?
I think there will be it really depends on where they're doing, how they're faring in their competitions, I think. I don't think Harlequins will be challenging for the title in the Premiership, that's for sure. And in that regard, I'm pretty sure we just heard that obviously the coach gets announced, I think September 7th, the Lions. And it looks, the Guardian are reporting it's going to be Gatland again, which means Jamie Roberts will be there, with bells on, that's for sure.
He knows where the bodies are buried.
Yeah, he is Gatland ball through and through. So, yeah, it's the relationship is that it's not as bad as it is with the French teams and letting them go on international duty, etc., which is absolutely crazy. And we've sort of seen that with Giteau now has gone back after about a week in Australia. Sadly, and I'd be careful. Morad Boujalou could be having a hit on someone anytime soon, I think. But it's I think their relationship, it depends. I think it's pretty personal. It depends who necessarily gets on well with Gatland. I don't think there's any absolute rule about it, but overall, the players have worked too hard. There's something like 11 days between the first test and the end of the Aviva Premiership season. Yeah. Something like 4 days between their first domestic game against whoever, is it the Maori, I think, first up or someone. So,
that's right. It's madness.
So it's absolutely crazy. So there definitely won't be, there'll be a lot of Saracens players, etc., won't be involved straight away on the tour because their bodies just wouldn't be able to hack it, to be honest.
That's right. Right, so third on the list is a name that I quite like, and I've heard quite good things about. I've got to be honest, I haven't seen a hell of a lot of him, but Matt Kvesic, is that how you pronounce his name? So his gone from, we ranked him 93, he had a pretty good points per game last season as well, and he's come up into, he's somewhere in the 9th round or 10th round when we actually did it. He's now into the 7th or 8th round, so he's risen 20 spots. What do you make of Matt?
Yeah, doesn't surprise me at all. Absolute class player, and I'm pretty keen on Gloucester, so it's fair to say that as well. But he offers that. He's one of the very few English players we don't know who are brilliant at turnovers. He is absolutely fantastic, and he's not a bad asset in the line out. But Gloucester are going to struggle this year. There's no way to put two ways around it, sadly, because they haven't made enough big signings. And he is the star of that back row. Absolutely, he is, and he can score tries and beat defenders as well, which you're looking for. But he's been really unlucky not to be involved in that England setup, especially given Rob Shaw's stay there, and I think he will be involved, and that could play against him. Now Haskell is out for so long. Kvesic is a natural 7. He is absolutely superb at it. So I think he could be more and more involved in the England setup, which could play against him, as we know, later in the season. But if he's not, he plays every single game, and he is one of the top point scorers. So I think he'll be in my team, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think he's probably going to be in mine. And the reason that is because there is a tier of loose forwards that are Premier that get you those kind of 16, 17 points. And it's Billy Vanapola, it's Thomas Waldron, and it's Nathan Hughes. And I'm forgetting someone, but there's someone in that tier anyway. And Matt's the top of the next tier, if you will, and he gets about 10 points a game. And that's pretty decent. Certainly looking at the last season's points from a fantasy rugby draft perspective and kind of overlaying that, that's actually not too bad. For those Super Rugby listeners, they'll be wanting a little bit more from it, but you're not going to get it. You're going to have to figure out that this is quite attritional. You're not going to get the same point scoring as you would in a Super Rugby, and that is actually quite decent value. And I think in the 8th round, if you can get a starting loose forward that gets you about 10 points, it's pretty decent.
Yeah, precisely. If you get a man who's going to start literally every game in the 8th round, you're doing well. You
Plug
are.
and play, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
The next one, I think, is a name that is... Well, he's not polarising players quite the same way Owen Farrell does, but Chris Ashton, so he originally was ranked 79. He's come up 19 places to be 59, so into the 6th round as well. What do you make of Chris this year? And the reason he was to kind of finish that point, he's actually, the reason we put him down there is because his points per game last year in a winning Saracens team was actually pretty low. Like, we were quite surprised. We originally had ranked him quite high until we actually decided to do some stats and overlaid those, and it actually told a little bit of a different story than what we thought we'd see. Yeah,
that interests me because he is a prolific try scorer. He seems to always be on the shoulder of someone to dot it down. But funny to say, I mean, he absolutely polarises opinion God. He is one of the most hated men in rugby, which is maybe why he struggled initially as well. But I think this is a case of he doesn't always get involved in the game, which doesn't always benefit him. Like, he's very happy to run the last 2 meters and score, and he is a very good finisher. But he isn't always on the shoulder of the 10, that is. It's just sort of dotting down. But he won't be involved in England. I mean, he keeps doing the ash splash, and everyone hates him, essentially. Tough on. He's one of these rugby league converts that hasn't been loved, which I think we've definitely seen before and will again.
Yep, indeed.
Mention your names. So I can see him why he's moved, but he's a very good try scorer. The one I'm interested there, he's obviously a Saracens winger, and they have just signed, I don't know how involved he'll be in his first year. They've also signed one of the brilliant Fijian 7 boys, Savanaka Rawaka, who has a great name, for one, but he could cause havoc. He is freakishly good. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of people do what he can do with the ball. So, will Ashton start every game? Not necessarily. Sean Maitland's also gone there from London Irish, and I think he, again, is a bit of an overrated one, to be honest. He's not a huge point scorer. He's consistent, but he's not the most exciting player in the world. But what importantly he could do is take time off Chris Ashton. So that's one thing to bear in mind, but he will get you 10 tries a season, Chris Ashton, if that's what you...
I was going to ask you about Rawaka and how much time he's playing, but I guess it is more in reference to Chris Ashton, so there is a chance that he could have minutes eroded from him by either Maitland or him.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's interesting, Rawaka. They've got this Sevens, a bit of a taste of it now, because last year they signed a very talented player called Mike Ellery, who was England's Sevens. He's 6'5" or so, and on the wing with a big old man bun. I mean, you can't miss him. I think he got 7 or 8 tries last year. I know some were in the LV Cup, which isn't looked too fondly on by many. But he still is a very talented player, and it's taken him a year to maybe get used to it. So maybe Rawaka, and I know he's still partying in Nadi and Suva Rawaka, they've been given a bit of a break, so maybe get him after Christmas.
Yeah, that's right.
Could be my advice, but I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do, because his teammate there, Yosea Tuisova, who's at Toulon, is arguably the best winger in the world for me right now. Genuinely up there, absolutely terrifying what he does week in, week out in the top 14. So if Rawaka can replicate any of that, he's going to be a hell of a year.
Interesting. The next name on the list we've got is a bit of an interesting one. I suspect it falls into this very similar category as Jamie Roberts, but Ben Teo. So he's ranked at 179, and he's increased his spot 16 places. So what do you make of Ben Teo's move to Worcester?
Yep, a very good move, that, and Worcester has some exciting players there, which is why I'm far more surprised he hasn't moved. You know, you see him and Roberts both 179 area, and Roberts moved 5 more places. That surprises me. I do understand Teo will be probably involved internationally, but so is Roberts, but he offers more. He offers offloads, that's for sure. I mean, I was working in Australia when he was at the Rabbitohs, and he is similar in the sense that he runs the hard lines, but he's definitely got more creativity around him. You know, he can beat players for Leinster, he absolutely tore it apart. And Eddie Jones is a bit of a genius, to be honest, I think. And if for him to spot something unique means he's probably got something unique. He doesn't miss the trick too much. So I think he will make a fair few clean breaks and beat some defenders. And I mean, if he's down at 179, sort of 180, now moving to 160, 16th round, I mean, that's somehow not even in your starting team. So again, not a bad option for centre at all. I did say I'd have more outside centres, but as big hard-hitting inside centres goes, he offers a lot more than just the run a hard line and go to ground. And he can turn over. You know, he played loose forward in rugby league, so he knows a bit about the contact area, which is very important.
Yeah, and the last, rounding out the list of the top 6 we've got here is a pretty obvious name, actually, I think, anyway. So Greg Laidlaw. So he was ranked 61, and he's now risen 12 places to be 48. So in the back end of the 5th round. I expect you think the same thing. Goal kicking halfback, quite important.
Exactly. He's got to be in there for goal kicking because Gloucester aren't a prolific try-scoring team anymore, sadly. They've lost that. And when the 3 is on option, he will absolutely take it the whole time. So it's just a solid pick, isn't it? He doesn't light the world up, Greg Laidlaw. Seems to be quite the Scottish way. He doesn't absolutely set it on fire, but he can play 9 and 10, which gives you that option. He maybe a few try assists thrown in there as well. And he's got his buddy who's come over as well. Matt Scott has come over from Edinburgh to join in Gloucester. So they could have quite an interesting and tight relationship there, which could help each other out. But he's just a guaranteed starter who will get points. Yep. And that you can't say for a lot of teams in the Premiership because so many of them will be international duty or they will rotate a bit. So I completely understand why people would get him in, even though he isn't the most flair. You're not looking for flair at fly half, scrum half. You're looking for points week in, week out, and that's what he will deliver.
Yeah, I think so. There's not much risk, I don't think, with Laidlaw. I think in terms of even if he doesn't get a boatload of those penalties conversions, I think he's still a pretty good pick.
And he kicks at late 80s. He's a fantastic kicker. Sure. Yeah.
All right, a few little bits about drafting as well. So one thing we have noticed, if folks have been playing the NFL draft version of fantasy, is that fantasy rugby is a little bit different in that it is a little bit more of a week-to-week process. So in the NFL, the draft is quite important. Your studs are pretty important, and that kind of sets the platform for the season. And it is to a certain extent a fantasy rugby draft as well. But there is a little bit more of a importance placed on who you're playing this week. Certainly with Super Rugby, I'm not 100% sure that's the case in Aviva because I think there's a lot of strong teams in Aviva. Whereas Super Rugby, you do have a bit more of a chasm down to the Moon Puppies or the Sunwolves, the Kings, and I guess the Hawaris at times as well. But for fantasy rugby, it's just when you're down in those last few picks, and obviously people have decided to go with named players, it's pretty useful to have a look at your first kind of half dozen fixtures and see who potentially has a good run in. Now, we haven't done that yet to actually pull out which teams we think do have a good front load to the start of the competition, but it's something to carry in, certainly to make sure that you've got those kind of first 5 or 6 game weeks sewn up. From a draft perspective, from how it actually works, so 2 hours before the draft date, everyone gets sent a draft reminder, and that's just so that you know that your draft, first thing, that you know your draft is coming up, and then secondly, what that kicks off is it opens the draft. So you can go in and you can figure out at that 2 hour point exactly what your draft pick is. And that's crucial. So it gives you that 2 hour window to find out, okay, I'm drafting at number 7. Who's likely to be on the board there? What are the 6 picks in front of me going to be? Who are the guys, the managers that are in front of me that are drafting? And then you can kind of look at your second and third round as well. So it gives you that kind of little bit of step up and a little bit of time to at least form a little bit of a strategy. And if you've done a few mock drafts, it kind of sees how that plays out. You kind of know how your team is going to go because you know your rough sleepers and your busts that you want to avoid. Let's look at a couple of people that potentially you want to avoid, but are falling in the draft. So the top kind of 5, number 1's an interesting one. So the top one who's falling the most is Owen Williams. So was ranked 48th, and he's dropped in a quite incredible 60 spots to be average draft position of 111. Now, I think a lot of it has to do a little bit with auto draft teams as well that weren't there, but that's a pretty low number. What do you make of Owen Williams, and what do you read into that?
Yeah, I read into that someone knows he's broken his leg and not shared the information. That is pretty staggering, because I was looking at it and I was absolutely flabbergasted to see Freddie Burns at 1. I mean, He's a good player, but he polarizes opinion. He can have some absolutely shocking games, which maybe means point system doesn't always nail you for not, his kicking's got a lot better, don't get me wrong, but it's not top notch. And Owen Williams sort of was in rotation with him for a while, but now they are 110 places apart, right. Which is very interesting. But you touched actually on the fixtures, and on that note, they've obviously released the first 7 rounds. Without doubt, I am getting Leicester players in there in abundance, because they have in the first 7 rounds they are playing Worcester, Newcastle, Sale, and Gloucester. Apart from Bristol, they're 4 of the weakest teams in the Premiership.
Sure.
So, I can see that Freddie Burns is a popular option, and for that alone means Owen Williams will fall, because they are like for like replacements. He's a 10 or not, and Freddie Burns is really enjoying being under Aaron Major's sort of wing, I think, and he's learned a lot through him, and he's got a really exciting backline outside him, and I think that's why Owen Williams is feeling the brunt of that. It's the old, hot. If someone's hot, someone's basically not. And I think Owen Williams has been hit by that. But he's a very talented player. And I think he, after this year, will go somewhere else to get a bit more game time, to be honest, if this year pans out as fancy rugby drafters sort of think it's going to go for him. But yeah, he's always going to be a second option, probably for your bench. And I wouldn't have him in there either, because Freddie Burns isn't going to be involved internationally. That's pretty much it for me. Yeah,
so there's a good point with Freddie Burns and Owen Williams, and we put our hands up recently listening to a lot of folks and taking a bit of opinion on board, is that we didn't quite realise how close Freddie Burns was to Owen Williams. So in terms of rotation and taking time off them, we kind of figured that the reason we had Evans and Freddie Burns at number 1 is because you could sew up the Harlequins and Leicester fly half without costing you too much in terms of that handcuff. So Owen Williams and Roy Jackson, you could get them quite late on in rounds. So whereas if you went to try and get the Wasps fly half, Jimmy Gopperth is a name. He's going to back up Sippers, but he's a name that people are going to recognise and probably draft a lot earlier than Owen Williams and Roy Jackson. So that was the thought, and he also had a really high points per game. And I'll get on to when I ask you who your number 1 overall pick was, because we've kind of had a few interesting discussions in the office around who our number 1 actually is now, and what we each personally would do. But looking at this list of the players that have fallen, what immediately jumps out to me is that backup fly halves appear to be taken a lot later than we would have expected them to. And again, I think a lot of it does come down to the way that the auto draft system works, and that's probably reading into quite a bit of that. But for us, if you drafted, say, a Freddie Jackson or even a Cipriani, we'd want to make sure that you got that backup. Now, I don't think that someone's going to pick up Gopperth who doesn't have Cipriani. It's a bit of a wasted pick unless you're trying to really piss someone off who's got Cipriani and you want to do some trading. But quite often we've seen that doesn't necessarily a foolproof plan, because you'll see someone being quite dogmatic and refusing to trade, and all of a sudden you've left with Jimmy Gopperth taking a spot who's never playing. But it's interesting to see a lot of these backup fly-halves down low. So what do you make of Jimmy Gopperth this season? Is he genuinely just going to be a backup to Cipriani?
It's tough. It sort of depends on the coaches. I mean, it's not like France where they change all 15 players every week. They basically accept they're going to lose away from home, which is absolutely crazy in top 14. But I expect he's too good a player not to get some time. But the problem is, both him and Cipriani can also play 15. But they've got Rob Miller, and they've just signed Willie LaRue, and they've got Kurtley Beale coming back from injury, who can also play there, if he's not in the 12 channel. So it's really hard to see how Jimmy Gopperth gets a lot of time, and Cipriani probably won't be involved with England, rightly or wrongly, because again, like Ashton, he polarises coaches, I think, more than anyone else. That's a fascinating one. I can see why he's falling, because Cipriani is a bit of a superstar, and with the back line outside of him, why would you ever rest him? But Dai Young isn't averse to resting a few players. We've seen it last year, occasionally, Nathan Hughes and some other players. They played a lot, but not absolutely every minute. So I can see why Gopperth is taking a bit of a hit, but he may be a good backup option, but I think there are better backup options out there, for teams that will definitely chop and change more, essentially, than at Wasps. But he's too good a player not to have some sort of influence. I mean, I know his hilarious running style before he kicks is always keeps people entertained very well. I mean, you've got a Kiwi 10 to play. You try and get him involved where you can.
Sure, indeed. So another player on this list that I think is quite fascinating is Henry Slade. So I think, again, he falls foul of he's the second fly half, so he's auto-drafted quite late. But he's someone that we had around about the 49 mark, and he's slipped 50 spots to about 107, 108, something like that. What do you make, I guess, first of all, ignoring that for a second, what do you make of Stenson, Slade, Devoto, and how that's going to shake out at the Chiefs?
Well, yeah, that's the thing exactly. I think what's the problem here is it's going to be Stenson 10, and then Devoto 12, and Slade will play his whole year at 13. I have no doubt about that. Last year, he played, I think, 95% of the time at 13 as well. So I think that's the problem, in regards to that, because you're probably asking people, us at the Rugby Pod, we have a beyond a man crush on Henry Slade. I've seen him since he was about 18, tearing it apart, and I think he is absolutely superb, and the future of English rugby could be built around him. He has got everything from tackles to creativity. But yeah, listed as a fly half, I wouldn't really necessarily touch him as much, to be honest. Again, he may be back up. He probably will be involved in England. So again, I know it's taken into account with the England side of things, but I would have a fair few extra players in there every year without loads of superstars. They just do it. They don't get beaten at Sandy Park. They play a great brand of rugby. Stevenson knocks over the points for fun, but they can also throw around the ball a bit, which is good to see. And they don't have, apart from James Short was a very good finisher, but he didn't even, towards the end of the season, he didn't start every game. So yeah, really, I'm very interested to see that, because in a lot of fantasy sports you play, if they have a player that can play a few positions, he can often be quite a good steal, because if he's down as, like Craig Laidlaw, scrum half, but he plays a lot of fly half, fantastic. And if he's down as a fly half, but will play a lot at centre, you're likely to get a lot more offloads, tries, tackles, defenders beaten. So I'm really surprised to see him slip down, 57 places or so. I think he could well, and having seen that, I hope no one who I'm in the league is listening, because I might nab him, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's not a bad shout. I wondered. Yeah, I think it is just down to the auto draft and the way that it places a starting fly half in your team, and then it pulls that way. But I actually thought that would probably be about the decent value. A lot of other folks were looking at outside backs and midfielders at that point anyway. But one player who actually should be a starting fly half is the next player on the list, is George Ford.
Yeah. I
can't really make head to toe of this. I think because he is the starting fly half, well, I assume he's going to be starting fly half. And he had a decent points per game as well. And we probably whiffed a little bit on the ranking at 43, and we've certainly changed our tune, and he's certainly in the top 10 for us now, for me personally anyway, when I'm looking at my rankings. But what do you make of George Ford this season? I suppose he's going to spend a bit of time away with England, but I guess a lot of players are. Yeah,
I cannot work this one out at all. He was named vice captain yesterday at Bath, so he's playing every game he can. And maybe again it's that whole he's had a bad year or whatever, but even when fly halves are part of the team, unlike Joseph when he has a bad year, at least he can make up points, with kicks, etc., which is what you're looking for at 10, and he is a good kicker. But maybe this is the whole case of your dad's gone, so you may not have the same year. But I mean, Todd Blackadder and Tobias Batson are hardly bad replacements, are they?
No,
I mean,
right.
he's worked with Dan Carter for however long, so I cannot work out how people were nabbing him in the 9th, 10th round. That is an absolute steal, and it's fine. He'll be involved internationally, but what's that? 8 weeks of the year, you just put him on your bench then if that's what's needed, because I can't see Bath being as bad as they were last year again. And they just need a bit more go-forward ball, which they will absolutely have with Luke Charteris and Taulupe Faletau joining. Yep. I mean, no way that wouldn't happen. And he's got some exciting nines. He's got Nico Matawalu, who is an absolute lightning bolt of an enigma of a human being. He'll get a yellow card but then get a hat-trick. He's completely nuts. And Khan Fotualihi is interestingly signed as well from Saints, along with Chris Cook, who's already there. So he's got a fair few talented options at 9, which maybe last year with just Cook really, and Matawalu was injured and suspended a bit.
Yep.
Didn't quite happen. So yeah, I'm definitely going to keep an eye on him. If he's around in the 10th round of my draft, I'm taking him, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it might be the point that even if I do have a starting fly half sewn up, I might even consider rostering 3 fly halves if he's there. Yeah. That's just such good value, and someone's going to need him at some point and use him as trade bait.
And as you say, you could have 3 fly halves of, picking up Slade in the 10th round, Ford in the 9th, and then maybe Cipriani in the 1st, and then you are laughing. Right. You'll take the title home if you do that.
Yeah, exactly. I think there might be a little bit of a case in that he's buried in that kind of 5th round in our rankings. So a lot of the other fly halves or the top ones go in the first 2 rounds, and that's where a lot of the managers are grabbing their fly half. Yeah. And so a lot of the time they may, when you're actually in a draft, you see about 30 players in front of you that you can select, and when a player is selected, they come off the board. It kind of notches up, so you're always at any one point in time are looking at 30 next players in the rankings. And I wonder a lot of the time, because he's down at 43, maybe he's just out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, exactly.
And then once it comes to it, a lot of those guys have realised, well, actually, I've already got a fly half now. Maybe I've cocked up a little bit, and at that point, I probably should have had George Ford. But I don't really want to back up, say, Owen Farrell with George Ford, because they're both going to be away for England, and that would be kind of stupid. So I wonder if there's a little bit involved in that as well.
It may well be, but I mean, I'd be gutted if I picked Tom Heathcote or Tusi Peacey at 14-15 and just seen George Ford is there. I would be absolutely happy. I'll be on the transfers the first minute I can, I think.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. All right, so let's look into a few selected others as well. So the player that I wanted to pull out was AJ McGinty. He's risen a few. He's risen 10 spots, but which is fairly nominal when you're talking about down at 179. But
yeah,
I expect he might be one of the steals of drafts. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. I'm very surprised to see him at 170, sort of area, because he is a guaranteed starter at 10 with Cipriani leaving Sale. Maybe this is, I think Sale will struggle this year. I don't think there's, 2 ways around that. I can't believe that he lost 1 home game last year. The last game was in Sue Gloucester somehow. But that showed how important Cipriani is. But AJ McGinty has something about him. I mean, you can't lead Connaught to the season they had, from 10 without being a little bit special. And he will play, every game. I mean, he plays for the US, so he's not going to be affected much with the whole international side of things, that's for sure. And I find it absolutely fascinating to see him so low. He's a brilliant steal for maybe first choice, let alone a bench player. I know. So I mean, knowing that you've got a starting fly half that low is quite exciting, to be honest. So I'm going to keep this a little bit short and quiet so no one picks up on it.
Well, that's right. The folks that do listen to the pod or don't listen to the pod and just looking at rankings, they're not going to see AJ McGinty because we whiffed on that. We didn't have a Sale fly half at that point. We weren't 100% sure. We didn't have knowledge on it. And now we do. Now we know that he's up there. But it's one of those where he might be that sneaky one where, you're coming into your 3rd or 4th round and no one's pulled the trigger on it yet, and you're wondering, how late can I actually get? How many people in this league know that AJ McGinty is going to be starting fly half for Sale? And you're kind of trying to second guess yourself, and you will have ended up putting a gun under your chin if someone pulls it before you. So I wouldn't wait till the 17th round, I think it is at the moment, I would try and get that somewhere else, especially if you think he's going to be your starting fly half. I would probably take him in the mid-round somewhere.
No,
what about JJ Hanrahan? So he's actually dropped in leagues, and he's a player that we discussed. I think it might have been with the Chaser lads. I can't remember, but he was someone that we thought potentially might pick up a handful of penalty goals and conversions as well at times.
Yeah, it's tough. Yes and no. I think it's a bit of the Cipriani Gopper thing. I just know Stephen Myler is sort of the love child there of Jim Malander is the problem with that one. So. I love the one thing I do love about JJ Hanrahan. He's not going to be the most popular when they Northampton announced his signing and they put up a picture of Ian Keatley instead of JJ Hanrahan on the official Twitter page. So I don't think he started his career that well there. He's got some talent. Let's not call it the X Factor because I'm the biggest Super Rugby fan ever and don't miss a minute, and you can't really compare the two, and they have X Factors. So
sure.
It's not quite the same, but I think I saw he's actually listed JJ Hanrahan down as a midfielder.
He is, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, so that adds a different sort of kettle of fish to it all, because they've got Luther Burrell obviously in that channel, who is much more of that Jamie Roberts ilk, and the 12 are running it hard. So if he plays a lot of centre, then it'll be interesting to see, because he is a very skillful player, and if I really, really love teams that have two ball playing, 10 and 12, and I think they often play a lot of the best rugby, as we finally saw occasionally with Australia when they did it, with Foley and Gitz, etc. So if he does get some time at centre, that's a good buy. But I mean, I can see him. He hardly took the world by storm last year. I don't know how he scored, but I can't imagine it was superbly. And if he does start, Stephen Myler still has the kicking boots for me. So
okay, so you reckon Stephen Myler is probably going to be the starting fly half, and there's no chance that he could be the starting. Well, there's always a chance, but it's unlikely.
Definitely a chance, but I don't think you can safely say he's going to start. Above 70% of games at fly, which is what you want from a starting fly half. But no, I couldn't say that at all. To me, I think Stephen Myler, despite getting on a bit, is still the number one choice. But to be honest, when you haven't got too much to lose early season, I would give JJ a go, because he's done it before. He's shown glimpses of absolute brilliance, and he's a bit more of an exciting player than Stephen Myler is. But Stephen Myler is just that consistent, always there. He's sort of what Steenson's doing now. He did like 4 years ago, when just getting his team in the right places. Very good kicking management game. Not a bad tackler, whereas JJ Hanrahan is a bit more of an enigma in that regard, but he can add some real excitement. So one to keep an eye on. My advice there is watch the first few rounds and how Jim Allender's playing it, and then see maybe you've got some transfers going on with some mates.
Sure, indeed. Next player on the list who's come up about 9 spots. Again, he was lowly ranked, and he's obviously started to get ranked again. He's come into the 17th round, is Callum Sheedy.
Yeah.
So question for you, would you prefer to have, ignore rankings and an EDP for a moment, would you rather have Callum Sheedy or Tusapisi as your starting in your team?
Wow, that's a good question. Would I rather have Callum Sheedy? Probably just Tusapisi, I think. And that's on experience more than anything else. Callum Sheedy, we saw in the championship, he had some absolutely stunning games, but this is another level, isn't it, really? Like, it's such a big step up. Whereas Tusapisi had some fantastic games in Super Rugby against some serious sides. So that's the reason I'm having him. I know there's question marks are definitely over his kicking, at goal, but he has a brilliant creative kicking game with chip overs, grubbers, etc. And when he's got people like Tom Vondell out wide waiting for it, that could they could reap the rewards of that. That's for sure. So I'd probably start with him, but if I'm being honest, I'm avoiding both of those Bristol players. I think there are other Bristol players that could have a bigger impact on the season. But yeah, it's an interesting one, that one, and I think that could be a case of they're getting 50% of the games each, and Tusapisi's a fair bit older, so his body will need more rest, and that's when Sheedy can come in, but they're never going to win games by 30 points, and that's when fly halves come into their own. So that is why. But it's an interesting one, that, and to see him rise, he's been rising a bit, hasn't he? Yeah, instead of falling. So
right.
Yeah, so that's interesting to see that. If I know he has played a fair few minutes in the pre-season, which could be some of the reason behind that, the logic behind that.
Sure.
But, I'm surprised, a little bit surprised to see it. You could actually have a team, couldn't you, with all three PCs? You could have Tusi, Ken and George in your back.
That's right.
Which I think someone has to do just for the benefit of the game.
I'm sure you can come up with a pretty creative team name around that as well.
Obviously.
Indeed. So Tusapisi, one of those players that we kind of like at Fantasy Rugby Draft. He attacks the line. He gets those defenders beaten. He gets the offloads. He likes that kind of the flair. And he showed that with the Sunwolves. Now, they had pretty good attacking structures, actually, to be honest, to the Sunwolves. They saw some belting tries. Yeah. But a lot of that was running to the line as well. So that's the main reason why we had him ranked quite high. It's probably a little bit of a hangover from Super Rugby, and he's fresh in our minds, and just kind of overlaying, doing some really crude math and thinking that he'll do quite well in the Premiership with that. But I guess there is a little bit of a question mark around who is going to be that fly half, and I think we'll get on to Tusapisi in a little bit. But next one is an interesting one that one of the lads brought up previously, is Mike Williams. He's come up 10 spots. So lock Mike Williams. I think he's just been brought into the England squad, or the England paying structure, right?
Up. He has, Leicester boy. Very, very talented player. He sort of benefited. He obviously had a few good years with Worcester, where he really made his name. I think he's actually another one of these incredible production lines, the Zimbabwe-born players from the Pococks, etc. And he's just a hard man, good in the line out. He's benefited from Ed Slater's injury, so it'll be interesting to see how much time he gets, because Ed Slater is fantastic, and he was really looking like a brilliant England option until a certain Maro Itoje and George Cruz decided to become the best sort of second rowers in the world almost. His second rows are always funny, aren't they? Because people want some real X factor from them. The likes of, I know he's not there, but like Leone Nakawara, for example. You want someone who can do it all. And understandably, we don't have the beauty of Super Rugby with, you saw on the weekend, Sam and Whitelock and Brody Retallick can offload from anywhere and do anything. Indeed. But if you want a solid player who's going to get a lot of game time, probably too early to be involved with England, Mike Williams at Leicester is a good option, definitely. And I think he's set to have a lot of game time. To be honest, in Ed Slater's recovery, I heard it's going well, but not completely there yet. And he could even partner him. So, interesting one to see that he's moving up. And again, it might be the case of some people have heard his name a bit from last year, and they just think he's a good, he'll get me my 10 points a game or whatever it may be. Because he'll be definitely worth it for a fair few carries, that's for sure, at the absolute least.
So lock is an interesting one for Fantasy Rugby Draft. So
I bet.
In Super Rugby, as you just completely correct, you alluded to, there's a lot of players like Eben Etzebeth's a good example. You get a lot of carrying. Peter Steph-Toy, very good carrying the ball, get a lot of meters and stuff like that. When we looked at the lock for Aviva Premiership, it's nowhere near the points output. It pretty much is Don Armand and the rest. And the reason that is because Don Armand's listed as a lock.
And he plays back row, perfect.
And he plays back row, which is the perfect storm. That's the archetypal lock for Fantasy Rugby Draft. That's exactly who you want. So we see it as a tier of, I think it's worth grabbing Don Armand pretty early on in those first kind of half dozen drafts, rounds, and then finding players like a Mike Williams, and even Itoje is going to be drafted by someone in your league, just on name and reputation and his class. But it doesn't necessarily play out for Fantasy Rugby Draft, unfortunately, in terms of points. So players like Mike Williams are ones to keep in your back pocket for draft day. Yeah. Next one, though, is an interesting one. Player with 2 first names and 2 last names, Sonodi. He's gone at 12 places.
Yeah, so good they named it twice. I actually am almost annoyed he's come up, because I thought I'd get him on the absolute cheap and quite easy, because he had a lot of injury last year, was essentially it. But the year before, he led everything pretty much the whole time. Meters gained, defenders beaten. And this is for a Newcastle side who are right down at the bottom. So, fantastic. So people have started to recognise he may be fit again. And that back, I should have a little word there. That outside backs there are really exciting at Newcastle, because obviously, they've got Simon Hammersley, who I know actually he played university rugby, where I was. And after 9 rounds last year, he also led defenders beaten and meters gained from fullback at Newcastle. He kept out Alex Tate amongst others, at Newcastle. And I've seen he's listed as a centre. So that could be one of the beautiful, perfect storms we were talking about. Simon Hammersley there from Newcastle. But they've obviously bought Gonover as well from Leicester.
Sure.
Which is some signing. So that back line could be quite exciting. And now they've stayed up, I think they could capitalise on that, Newcastle. And Sonotti is, I mean, if you've got a minute, just go to YouTube and watch his tribute. His feet, I honestly haven't, his feet are him and the Scud alike. They're the I put them top of the world for that because I haven't seen anything like it. And he just sadly had an injury all of last year, really. I mean, he must, I think, can't remember the stats, but he would have played under 5 games, I'm sure. But now he's back, and Alassane Tuolangi came back for a bit of thing, but he's gone, and a few other backs have left Newcastle. He should play week in, week out without interruption, and if he's still around at that stage, he's absolutely getting at least on my bench, if not maybe starting, because you look at the defenders beaten and meters gained, no one really compares to him 2 years ago, and I don't see why that would change.
Yeah, right. And plastic pitch right up there.
Exactly.
Well, so
it makes such a big difference. That's where we were up at university. I think that's why it's benefited Simon Hammersley, and another one that's lost is Josh Beaumont, was his teammate at Durham University with me. And these plastic pitches take out the rain, which is inevitable for 300 days of the year. And it means that you can play a much more attacking rugby. The only problem with Newcastle is finding that right fly half to ignite it all, which has been their problem for a little bit of time now. Now the legendary Andy Good, who is obviously our favourite on the Rugby Pod, he's joined it, and now he's gone. It's interesting to see who's going to get them ignited. But if they do, then some very exciting players there who you can get on the cheap, and Sonotti is the absolute pinnacle of those.
Yeah, he brought up a player there that is actually on our list that I wanted to chat through as well, and Josh Beaumont. So it's easy enough to make a decent increase down in the late rounds, getting 10 points, picking up 10 places or picking up a round effectively isn't too many great shakes when you're down to the 17th, 8th round. It's much harder to pick up places when you're in, say, the 5th, 6th round up. And Josh Beaumont's done that, though. So he's increased 5 places, was actually is quite significant, from 59th down to 53. Yeah. A lot of folks have talked him up on previous podcasts as well. I suspect it sounds like you're going to say something similar.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I was lucky enough to get 2 years at university watching him captain our side, and he's the complete player. I know it says, I mean, everyone talks about his dad and stuff, but no point comparing them. And what's big here is he's a fantastic line-out option as well, so you've got points there. But he annoyingly, he got injured towards the end of last season, but he's just been named captain of Sale. That is why I imagine he's moving a bit, because he's playing the whole time. It may still be 1 year too early at England, but the versatility that he can play in the second row or back row means he's got to be a bit of a shoo-in, and he's quite un-English in the sense that he's benefited from playing in arguably the best university rugby side in England that we're at, and because they just won so much, they could play with some real flair, and that's given him this ability, 4 clean breaks, 4 offloads. He runs the ball unbelievably well from 8, which is what I think he will do. The only downside is that he could be in a Sale side that are not as prolific as last year, would be my only comment. But to see him move up, that's like 10% move. That is pretty. That's very good going, and he would definitely be there or thereabouts. I think come the end of the year, and because he'd probably be in the England setup, but he's a little bit too early, and he's unlucky. That for me, potentially my number 1 pick, Nathan Hughes, is now English as of June the 23rd. Yeah. He's a little bit unlucky in that regard, because that boy is a freak. That's all you can say, and he probably just takes in the pecking order. But that's good for fantasy draft rugby players, because it means Beaumont will be seeing a lot of him at Edgeley Park leading Sale. Yeah, that's right. So I've got my first draft tomorrow morning, actually. Oh yeah, with a few lads. Yeah, absolutely. And Josh Beaumont is one player that I've listened to the guys on the podcast that we've had on, and they've spoken glowingly, just as you have, about him. Yeah. And he's not a big name. He's not those names that people will eventually pull on. So I hope I'm probably going to have to do it a round before just to secure him. But depending on where I draft, he's someone that I'm certainly targeting. Yeah. Next player is the guy that you actually brought up, so Ruaka. So he's increased 10 places as well. So it looks like the book's out on him. Yeah. But it's going to take a little bit of time to get there, I think. And I think we've talked about it. Yeah, I think you just wait till the new year with Ruaka, until the parties are finished, the hangover,
the carve is dried up.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. But he could be genuinely the next Draftageddeon star in the Premiership, which I'm really excited, about. But we'll have to wait and see with that one, I think.
Yeah, indeed. A couple of observations I wanted to make around the ADP is, and it's to do with the auto draft system. So the way the auto drafts, if someone's not there, they can't attend the draft, they're hit by a bus, the internet connection goes down, or they just don't want to draft, they just don't feel comfortable, and they want to let the auto draft do it. It fills out your starting team first. So based on the rankings, and then once you've done that, it then just fills out your bench with any position at all. But it has to fill out a starting team first, which is why you see a lot of locks and front rows come off the board in the 9th and 10th round, and they come off for the auto-drafted teams. So if you wanted to get, and if you were targeting, say, the Leicester front row, you wanted the Saracens front row, or you wanted a specific lock that's quite high up in the rankings, please be aware that in that 9th and 10th round is when those auto-drafted teams are going to happen. So just look around you, look at the draft board and see who is auto-drafting, and then you'll know pretty quickly whether or not you have to pull a trigger on the front row that you like or the lock that you like. It's just something to be aware of, and it seems to be the 9th and 10th round.
Good to know.
Yeah, it is. It was something that I couldn't. It took us a while to kind of figure out. We saw a lot of locks going in that area, and it was and a lot of front rows, and we're like, that seems a little early for us to be bringing off that. But then we realised that it's auto teams.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I've got a question for you then. This is a bit of a challenge. Who do you think in the top 20 is the biggest riser and the biggest faller? Now, for those who don't have the rankings enough, I'll whip through them and I'll give you a little bit of time to think about that, Ollie. But so at 1 we've got Freddie Burns, Nick Evans, Danny Cipriani, Vianu Rokundungani, Stenson, Good, Beetham, Heem, and Owen Farrell at 10. James Hook at 11, JP Peterson, Christian Wade, Tom Heathcote, Tusapisi, Jack Knoll, Marlon Yard, Lewin Peekamo, and 19 and 20 is Nathan Hughes and Faletau. So who out of that do you think might be the top riser and the top faller? And also a little bit of an asterisk in that it's not huge. Like we're not talking big numbers here, and it's what you pointed out. It is 10%ish, but it is still an interesting little point.
Okay, I'm going to say the top riser is one of Freddie Burns or Cipriani, purely based on the fact the fallers are Williams and Gopeth, their other options. So I think those two, the 1 and 3 area, could have started near a 9 or 10, would be my inkling, in regards to that. The biggest faller, maybe Jack Knoll, because he did brilliantly last year. I saw he got quite a fair few points, but there are reports he's had a few niggles, etc. And he's obviously will be involved in England, which, a fair few of the others looking down that list won't be, bar Owen Farrell, really. All of the others are pretty safe. Alex Good potentially a bit, but at the top 16, he's the only one who will play a lot of international rugby. So I'd say I'm surprised to see him maybe at 16, but that's because he hits so many points. So maybe he's the biggest faller. That's completely going off a bit of a novice first time draft king go, but that's what. Rugby draft go, but that's what I think. Yeah.
No, you're not far away. So they did move in the right directions you thought, but they weren't the players that were. So the decrease, and we talked about them, is Tusapisi.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So folks are obviously a little bit uncomfortable, A, with Bristol full stop as a team and how they'll go this season, and then B, whether, you alluded to it, potentially it's a 50-50, and you're not the only one. Alan Dimmock also, last podcast, he brought that up as well. He said it potentially could be a little bit of Tusapisi at home and a little bit of Callum Sheedy away, or some sort of variation of that. So it looks like drafters are doing that as well, because he's dropped 3 spots, which is actually quite significant.
Yeah.
In the overall scheme of things when you're talking about in the teens. And the player that's risen is JP Peterson.
Interesting.
So he was at 12 and he's come into 10. So he's been ranked at 10.
Okay. That's an interesting one, because where's he going to play, I think, is part of that. He can do 13, but he's then more capable of playing on the wing as well. But he benefits from what a backline. Like, I'm actually looking here in the top 25. You've got Tuolangi, JP, Peter Beetham, Talusa Veanu and Freddie Burns.
I know.
Like,
right?
that is terrifying.
Yeah.
And his experience will be fantastic. And yeah, he could just be on the end of some brilliant back moves, because I don't think he's past it, don't get me wrong, but he's not the player he was, JP Peterson. Otherwise he probably wouldn't have left South Africa, to be honest.
That's right.
So yeah, he's not an out and out star, but he could tick some boxes and get some points, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a byproduct of, it sounds like from what most folks are thinking. Know the name is one thing as well, coming in, the bright shiny new thing coming in. And he's also just going to be I think he'll play on the wing. Well, that'd be my kind of rough guess at the majority of the time. But you don't really know. But he's just going to be on the end of a lot of things. And that's what he does well. He finishes okay. I've never been a massive believer in JP Peterson. He does a lot of things well. He doesn't do anything poorly, which actually goes a long way to being a good international winger.
Yeah.
So that's probably the reason why he's in there. And he's as you alluded to, Aaron Major, good backline, pretty attacking. That's the variation of that. So, how about any other players that you saw that were a little bit high or a little bit low in our rankings? Did you have a look at those, or you've had a thought?
Yeah, there's a few that caught my eye. One who I think is just a brilliant out-and-out star player, and I think Worcester won't be as bad as maybe people think, is Chris Pennell. He is a superstar. He really is. He can do it all. And again, he's unlucky that Alex Good has been so fantastic, because otherwise he would be, I think he'd be a starting 15 in a lot of other nations, to be honest. Sure. So I'm very surprised to see him. He's down in 36 or so for an outside back is good going, because he will break a lot of tackles, line breaks and some tries as well. So interested to see him there, but it sort of pivots on how successful Tom Heathcote is at 10. That will play a big part. But he's got Ben Teo there as well, amongst others. So that was a very interesting one for me. And
he's just to jump in there, he's crept up 4 spots. So obviously, so a few managers obviously seeing the book on him as well.
Yeah, and rightfully so. Another one around that same area was Timana Harrison. Because I couldn't have been more impressed with him in last year. I seem to be picking out a lot of players who are Kiwis in England, funnily enough. I know he went off after like 20 minutes in his England debut, which was quite tough. But if Eddie Jones says he does that, he does that. But he is a brilliant loose forward player, and I know, above him you look at Waldrum, Vunipola, Faletau Hughes, etc. I know they're all absolute stars. Pick 'em as well. Watching him will be exciting. So considering he's the 8th or 9th or 10th sort of loose forward, he may not be overly involved in England. I think he'll be there or thereabouts, but may not be, top of the agenda. I think he is someone who you should really, really keep an eye on, to be honest. There are a couple that caught my eye the most. In regards to being too high up, 2CPC, absolutely. It's too high up for me. And Phil Dolman's interesting. He is just one of the most steady player I've ever seen. I'd probably imagine he scores quite highly. But for people who aren't avid fans like us, I think they'll be like, who the hell is this Phil Dolman at 21st?
Yep.
Like, he doesn't, he doesn't, he won't score hundreds of tries or anything, but he is, as you say, just so consistent. But he could be in a bit more trouble now. They've got, Sam Hill in those centres, and I know he can play other options. He plays 15 a lot, Phil Dolman. Which may be fine, but now they've got Devoto, Sam Hill, Campagnaro's still there, Henry Slade plays centre. So I think that's a bit more of a case of he might be playing more at 15 and therefore he's fine value. But if he is based in centre, 21 is, it would be one of my avoid a bit earlier on, I think.
Sure. No, that's cool. That makes sense to us. Yeah, we were looking at, we weren't too sure about Dolman, where he'd fit in. His points per game was okay. It was about 12 points. Yeah. Nowhere near Tuolagi, but no one was. So it's hard to kind of cast him with the same brush. But that fullback gets those cheap meters. The yards before he actually gets the contact. And even if he does kick the ball back, gets 10 meters, free clip in the ticket.
Yeah.
Whether or not he does that, though, is a good question. And he's dropped 2 spots, Phil Dolman, if you look at the average draft position.
Right. Okay,
I'm gonna put a gun to your head now. Who's your overall number 1 pick?
I was dreading this question. I'd love to know what the other guys said, actually, because there's I imagine, just asking you, actually, throwing it back, is outside back or fly halves on average, who scores the best from last year as an example?
So for Premiership rugby, it is the fly half. So Vianu and Beetham, and I'm forgetting someone, were up around the 23, 24, but they were an exception. They were big scorers. The rest of them, the fly halves, that starting fly half, get somewhere between 22 and 18 kind of points on average.
Yeah, because I was tossing up, funnily enough, between exactly that. Danny Cipriani and Talisa Veanu were my two who stood out, and I'm going to go Cipriani. It may be quite an obvious pick, and a bit of a bolder one, given that Gopeth may play a bit and eat into his minutes a tad, but when you've got the players outside him, he's got somehow under the salary cap. There's no way he can't. There's no way he can't have a huge year, and throw that in the fact that he's not seemingly that involved in England is just beyond an ideal scenario for draft pickers. So he will be, I think he'll go in the first three anyway. So if I get the chance, he will be the first name on my list, because I know Dao Young is a pretty bullish character, and if Cipriani steps out of line, which he could do, especially now he's got his old mucker Curtly Beale back with him, I'm a bit nervous to see how they get on after some stories of their nights in Melbourne back in the day.
I've heard those too.
Yeah, if he avoids Coventry nightclubs, then I think he will be a bit of a star. So he's my number one pick there.
I like it. No, that's good. So far we've had Gareth Steenson, we've had two for Nick Evans, we've got one for Freddie Burns, one for Christian Wade, and now one for Danny Cipriani. I like it. So that just shows you, for those listening out there, that everyone brings something different to the table. Everyone has a different view on who's going to be a great player, and it's really important to know who your league mates are and what their kind of local bias is as well, because sometimes they lean that way or another. But so our view kind of has changed a little bit, or certainly my view at least. So the way that the rankings work on the site is that they're put up at the start of the competition, the very, very beginning when we open the site up, and very rarely do we actually change them. They're just for auto-drafted teams, essentially, to be able to say, so they don't get really bad teams if they get hit by a bus or something like that. So it gives them a chance, even if they do miss that draft. And very rarely do we change it. Maybe if there's a Andre Pollard injury and he's in the first round, we'll kind of drop him out of that. But apart from that, we don't really change it. But from my personal opinion, from what I've heard from everybody in the preseason, is I might actually draft Owen Farrell now. He was right up there. I think he might have even been the top at 23 points per game when he actually played for Saracens in terms of... Yeah, he was really, really good. And our question mark going into those rankings and why we had him down at number 10 was to do with who his backup was going to be. It wasn't clear at that point whether it was going to be Alex Lizetsky or Lazowski, or whether Alex Good might actually come in and take some time off him as well. But we're pretty confident now that it's going to be Alex Lizetsky or Lazowski, and that Owen, and it backs up that way, and he'll take the goal kicking. And Lazowski was actually a pretty good points per game as well when he filled in, and he looks a decent player. And from everything we've heard, he sounds like a pretty solid backup, and someone that you're not going to have to overdraft for as well. So he's not a name like a Gopeth that you're going to have to pull. So that's why we think, well, certainly my point of view is that if I've got a chance to grab Owen Farrell, I probably will. Yeah, no,
I absolutely agree with that. I mean, Lazowski, I think maybe Alex Shaw, who's a huge fan. One of the pundits is a massive fan, and he does look like the part and to be the replacement, because Alex Good did play there. I was at school with him many years ago, and he was a 10 there. And if he gets any slower, he always says he'll be back at 10. After the year he had at fullback, you can't see him moving, can you really? So, I think Owen Farrell, you're just guaranteed, his kicking is just freakish, isn't it? You are guaranteed points. But I just want to also touch on, they obviously don't get as many points, loose forwards, but now he's qualified for England. I'm probably a little less inclined to take him, but I would have had Nathan Hughes. I really think this boy is beyond special. And even though he's a loose forward, he beats defenders and offloads like no one I've seen. And it's a compliment, but he's extremely greedy as well, which means he scores a lot of tries from the pick and go. I watched the highlights of their preseason game against Yorkshire Carnegie from 2 days ago, and I think he got at least one, maybe two there. I think it was two. And he can also score for fun. So, he'll probably be my second pick, which is quite rare for a loose forward. But, I think he is beyond a star, sort of Ardy Surveyor levels, just very different style of rugby, but that's how big and bright his future is.
So we had Nathan Hughes as our top loose forward before Haskell got injured.
Right.
And the main reason is you could draft him, and he was on that top tier that wasn't going to be pulled away. Everyone else is probably going to be pulled away, apart from Thomas Waldrum, and he's got question marks over whether he's going to be starting all the time there next year anyway. But he was that next level player that wasn't going to get pulled away from international, so you didn't have to put a bench spot or use a bench spot on having him in your team. So then the Haskell injury happened, and he probably will be pulled away. So it brings him kind of back to the pack of Vunipola, Pickamoles, and Waldrum.
Completely understandable. No, but there's not loads of split between this, but I just think he gets more points. He'll just get more points than Faletau and Pickamole, and they're all in that line. But to see all three of those this year is very exciting from a Premiership standpoint, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, no, that's really good. Some good tidbits in there. Certainly some stuff that I'm going to take away and use tomorrow morning in my draft. Let me put it that way. A little bit of admin. You can follow us on Twitter at Fantasy Rug Draft. That's Fantasy AEG Draft, or jump on Facebook. We try and post some team news and a little bit more information around the top managers for the week on there as well. Or send us a mail at support@fantasyrugbydraft.com. We're receiving a lot at the moment. It's great. There's a lot of guys trying to get their feet under the table, understand how the draft works, and asking questions like yourself in terms of, what are the value positions and what are the actual scoring and which players to kind of target. So really keep those coming. The Rugby Pod's on at _Rugby Pod. Is that right?
Yep. That's us on Twitter. Yeah, and you find us on SoundCloud. Now we're doing all our new podcasts, etc. with Jim Hamilton. We've obviously in New Zealand. We've gotten a fair bit of trouble recently with Vern Cotter. Vern Cotter hit the front pages and now has left for Scotland, so we don't know how much we had to do with that.
Bunnygate.
Bunnygate, exactly. So finds out because they are two brilliant characters of the game, and you probably don't want Jim Hamilton in your fantasy team, but he won't mind me saying that. But,
he's got some good stories. The latest one, the Free Willy one, was pretty amusing as well.
Yeah,
so
he's a character, that's for sure.
Yeah,
so we are anywhere on social, you'll find us essentially. The Rugby Pod, thanks.
No, that's very good. And last question for you, I guess, did your jaw heal okay?
Yes, just about. Thank goodness that was a friend who I've kept very anonymous. But that's University Rugby Live, and I think actually speaking of it, a few of the boys in the draft will know the certain individual, I'm sure. So we'll keep that under wraps for now, given everything that's gone on recently. But I'm all good, recovered nicely. Good hospital.
Good man. Good to hear about it. All right, that's about all the time we have for today. Thanks for downloading, listening. I'm Bruce Wilkinson. El Tio Rapido.
What a bust here by Christian Cullen. Plenty of support, and what a dummy!